Welcome everybody to a new Sunday Roast. Helena, No Justice, would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Hi, yeah. So my channel's called No Justice. So that's at No Justice MTG on Twitch, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all that like a YouTube. And I'm a leftist who talks about politics in it. And I rant a lot. I get angry. So hopefully we'll enjoy that on the show today.
That's why we've got you on first thing
Definitely,
in the morning.
Absolutely.
On a Sunday.
Morning rant's always good.
and the magnificent Max, can you introduce yourself?
Hi guys, my name is Max. I run the Robespierre channel where I talk about British politics and Brexit in particular. And my wonderful co-host Alex, can you tell us about yourself for anyone who's new to this stream, new to the channel?
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm also known as Political X. I'm a historian and author and all-round ranter on Brexit, as well as all the other crazy issues this government have launched into. So the first thing, I mean, I'm a bit mixed on what to start off with. I'm a little bit like, how's Brexit going? Because I'd love your opinion, Helena. I'm also quite curious about these UK attack ads that have come out. And we've got the CPTPP to bring in. So I say, let's just go for it. How's Brexit going? And we can link in the CPTPP with all of that. I'm just going to go with an open-ended question, Helena. How do you think it's going?
I mean, poorly. I think it's probably a good way of starting how Brexit's going, because still, to this day, we have the entirety of all of the political class who have any ability or say on the direction of Brexit are still holding to these kind of ridiculous ERG red lines. Obviously, the Windsor Protocol, or the Windsor Framework, I guess, is better than what we've had previously by a very slim margin. Although, amusingly, the one thing I've gotten out of the Windsor Framework stuff was that a bunch of people on the right wing from ERG and Reform UK and the DUP are saying that it somehow undermines the union.
That EU law will still be supreme in Northern Ireland. The rights of its people under the 1800 Act of Union are not restored. The Green Lane is not really a green lane at all. The Stormont break is practically useless, and the framework itself has no exit other than through a highly complex legal process.
When it does the opposite of that, the thing that was undermining the union was all the hard Brexit ERG red lines that were threatening the sanctity of the Good Friday Agreement, which is the one thing that kind of gets preserved in some kind of bastardized form by the Windsor Framework. So yeah, like the fact that we are still holding very firm on things like, customs union, future EFTA agreements, for example. Obviously, I'm a leftist. I'm not exactly a gigantic fan of the European Union, but it's something that I think is necessary. And I think UK membership of it is necessary, but I also believe that the referendum has to be honoured, at least in some form, in the wake of 2016. But what that doesn't mean is that you therefore have to completely nix every single relationship with the European Union, both economic and diplomatic, which is what both this government and Keir Starmer seem to think is necessary. I think the mandate was such that we should be completely nixing all future relationships, which is what we shouldn't be doing. And quite frankly, where we are at now with the current agreement is the bare minimum of future relationship with the European Union that I would expect. And we can see from the cues we've got for passport control in the southwest of how well this is going for the regular person, right? Because that's what I really care about. How is this affecting the regular person? Obviously, lack of economic growth is really going to affect us, as is any future restrictions on our ability to be able to travel. And, as someone who would quite like to leave this country right now for personal reasons, given the actions of this government, basically being trapped in this country is not something we're a big fan of, quite frankly.
There's an element of feeling like it's a bit of a prison. I mean, they've got the biometric checks coming in. That's going to be fun, because that is, I mean, you do it in the United States. You fly over, they do a biometric check on you. It just takes everything a little bit longer. But once you're sort of over in the States, you can't get away anyway. You've got to somehow figure a way through customs. Whereas obviously here, there's a little bit more, leeway with it. But it is going to be French officers running this, I assume, in Dover. And you're going to have to do a fingerprint and a face scan. That's going to be done properly first. Then it's going to last for 3 years. And then on top of that, you've got, every time you go over to the EU now, we're going to have to show our fingerprints and a face scan, which, there's an element of going into prison, which will have that, or going into a police jail for the evening. Not that any one of us have ever done anything like that, of course.
It's Tony Blair's wet dream.
Do you look at anything from the Tony Blair era with fondness as a result of them being in the EU, or is there an element of? Because I was watching one of your videos the other day where you were talking about I think it was a guy from up north who was retiring. I think it's like one of your key trailer videos.
The difference was the wealth gap between the boomers and the millennial generation. I mean, like, do I think the Blair years were better than what we have now? Absolutely, 100%. Like, there were plenty of things that were better then than there are now. But when I critique the Blair years, obviously I think membership of the European Union helped us out in all of the ways that I critiqued the way that we've left. But I think people, especially on the left, they will view the Blair years with rose-tinted glasses off the back of, a load of things that were patchwork, unironically what Keir Starmer would call sticking plaster politics, right? To essentially put the non-solutions to problems that were created by neoliberalism that then create further problems down the line, right? For example, we say, well, the NHS was at its best that it's ever been in decades, in half a century under the Blair administration, right? But what was the reason for that? Was it because we had a properly funded NHS, or was it because they got loaded up with all this there's a PFI debt that we're now continually paying off now at great expense to the central bank? Like, this is something that created good outcomes, but at what cost, for example? Because as far as I'm concerned, right, the national debt is a figure that's completely illusory and it doesn't really matter at all. And the reason why we have loads of PFI debt in the NHS under Blair was nothing to do with any specific reason that it was necessary to do it, but it was for optical reasons, because they wanted to ensure that money was being put in without increasing the national debt and looking like the profligate spenders that Labour are known to be within the public psyche. So we're at this point where decisions are being made without any thought for the future long-term impact on what it's going to do overall. In fact, it's spending money now in a bad way to buy votes now at the expense of future generations. And I think that's very cynical politics. And loads of different things, like the housing crisis, I think, is born out of the failure of the Blair administration and our foreign policy in that era, apart from maybe Sierra Leone, I'm obviously very critical of. So I think that people do tend to forget all of the structural failures of Blair's adherence to neoliberal economics whilst simultaneously only remembering a lot of the good stuff that we got, like the Equality Act, like we got all the benefits increased huge amounts over the Blair administration. We got economic growth, right? But it's difficult to properly understand the issues that we have now without properly evaluating the failures of Blair's economic outlook during his administration.
I think we'll have the same thing with the EU. And that's a good thing. I think we're going to go back and we're going to have rose-tinted glasses over it. Well, I think the youth generation will. It depends on how the education system works and how social media pushes it. Because obviously we've got this element, and I've very much felt it. Not all. I'm going to be very careful. I'm trying to be very careful in my phrasing here. Not all, but a large chunk of those people that voted in the Brexit direction seem to have nostalgia towards the British Empire more than they did the EU. I think it's just going to flip. Because eventually they're just the kids coming through and going, oh, you were able to do that. Oh, you were able to do that. Oh, they protected loads of stuff for us. Oh, I had no idea. Oh, it looks really cool to be able to go and live over there. Oh, I've got a Spanish dad. I've got an Italian mum. I've got all these deep embedded connections. Like, we've gone multicultural. There's not much that the Brexit generation are going to be able to do with that. Obviously, it's more nuanced than that. And obviously, there are different elements. I think when we had Terry Christian on, he was pointing out really interestingly some of the stats showing that, there was, even though percentage-wise London was less Brexit, if you look at the numbers, he was suggesting that actually the numbers for Brexit in the South was quite significant. So it's interesting to see. I don't see how we're not going to have rose-tinted glasses.
No, in a way it's already collapsing, because this week the business secretary, one of the business secretaries, I think her name is, or technology secretaries, went to Brussels to negotiate the UK's re-entry to Horizon. So this is, it's starting, even Tories are starting to see that maybe things are not going so well. With the passport problem at the port of Dover, at the beginning, the response was nothing to do with Brexit. But then even Number 10 came out a few days after, and said, yeah, Brexit is involved. But it's becoming more and more difficult to defend it. And I think it's going to get to a stage where all the parties are going to say, yeah, it was a bad idea. Actually, yeah, we could have all these things when we're in the EU. Maybe we should bring some of them back. But I keep saying that what's going to have to happen is you're going to have to get the Tories out of power completely. And my fear about the Labour Party is, and maybe we'll come to it later in the show, is that they seem to be chasing a small group of people. Now, when I, for example, when we had Phil from A Different Bias on, he was saying that the reason maybe this is happening is because they're looking at polling in marginal seats, not polling on the national level, but just in these marginal seats. And they're convinced that, okay, we need to say Brexit, we're going to make Brexit work. We're going to be tough on crime. We're going to be tough on the cause of crime. These are the issues that we need to focus on because we need to win these marginals. But when it comes to Brexit, I think what needs to happen is you need to get the Tories out, and the next batch of Tories that will come in will be probably younger people, maybe more pro-European, and then the process to rejoin the EU can start. But I think you're right where you said that looking back, there will be a more positive view than we're seeing today, because I think it's already happening. You know, we're talking about, what was it, Rishi Sunak just about a month ago talking about the value of the single market.
Northern Ireland is in the unbelievably special position, unique position in the entire world, European continent, in having privileged access, not just to the UK home market, which is enormous, 5th biggest in the world, but also the European Union single market. Nobody else has that.
Well, literally, the most interesting economic area in the world, right?
Yes.
It's like, okay, well, can we not be the interesting economic area? What's the deal with that? And I think I do agree. I think there will be some level of rose-tinted glasses about a membership of the European Union, because it's interesting you make the parallel with the British Empire, because young people nowadays, they have no reverence toward it whatsoever. Because they take a materialist perspective too. I think a materialist philosophy is something that's born out of kind of I dare to say reactionary movement against neoliberalism coming from the younger generations. They want the social contract again. They want there to be more state intervention into the economy on a kind of macro level rather than on a micro level. Like, they do want this stuff, and they don't want to end up with a kind of car crash economic policy that we've had for the last 45 years without any kind of proper change from that. And it's a real stark generational difference that we have between the way older people view the country and the way younger people view the country at the moment. Yep. And this is a gaping chasm that's only getting wider as time goes on. I mean, there's an interesting graph that you see from John Byrne Murdoch from the Financial Times, when he was plotting how millennials and Zoomers are getting more left-wing as they age, which is against the trend that people would have observed. When you look at the trend, boomers are getting more right-wing as they age than the generation that preceded them. And this is entirely a result of a certain level of economic policy that was directed at them in the public sector started off of the 1980s, for example. They were essentially the beneficiary of the demutualization of huge amounts of the economy, and the sell-off of the council houses, for example. So they have a lot of wealth to protect. It's made them incredibly right-wing. So they are becoming more economically right-wing, they become more susceptible to right-wing views of history and philosophy and all that kind of other stuff that comes along with it, which young people don't have. And that's why Labour are going in this direction, because they understand that as demographics have shifted, and because obviously both Thatcher and Blair continued the turning of our country into a service economy rather than a manufacturing economy. So that has meant that all these satellite cities in the red wall areas of this country, they've lost loads of the young population to the city demographics, for example, because there's no jobs. There's no jobs in Accrington. There's no jobs in Bolton. There's no jobs in Stoke or whatever it is. If you're a kid growing up in these areas, you're going to go to university in Manchester. You're going to go to university in Liverpool. You're going to go to university in Leeds. You're going to go to Birmingham, whatever it might be, and then you're going to get a job there. So all of the young vote in this is concentrated in these very highly pro-European, pro-Labour constituencies already. So if you are a Labour strategist, there's no point in trying to pander to these people, because their votes make no difference whatsoever. They're already incredibly left-wing, and they're already congregated in incredibly non-marginal, very high-voting Labour constituencies, which is toxic for our political policy making, because that means we have two parties who only care about one tiny, tiny minority of theoretical quote unquote swing voters in the country, which has led us to this surreal nadir where we have both parties trying to essentially out authoritarian each other. And that's very dangerous.
Would you see PR changing that?
Yes, 100%. 100%. Or even ranked choice voting like we have in Australia. Actually, I prefer ranked choice voting to proportional representation, as I believe that it gives us the opportunity to be able to have a more fair voting system whilst also shutting out the right-wing extremes that we have in this country. Because the Conservatives, therefore, cannot win on a right-wing platform under an alternative vote because there's not enough of it. There's actually genuinely not enough right-wing, like properly right-wing sentiment in this country for them to win on a right-wing platform. But because UKIP essentially did an excellent job of trying to turn a small subset of the population into an incredibly right-wing too far right ideology. And these are the theoretical swing voters. They what Phil from a different bias would call the authoritarian left, for example, and that they believe in some level of state intervention, but they favor authoritarian type social policy and are socially reactionary. They become the only vote that matters under first past the post, whereas that stops happening with even just a ranked choice vote would do. Although I wouldn't say no to proportional representation either.
I would turn around and say, yeah, the Conservative dream. I was thinking about this the other day. You have the American dream, don't you? Rags to riches, essentially, is one way of looking at it.
Which is a pile of crap, but go on.
You have to be asleep to believe it, right?
I have had to point this out to a lot of people. Like, the Arnold Schwarzenegger story is absolutely fascinating. I think he came over with $30, works in a meat packing factory and just hauls ass in the gym and basically starts to win Mr. Universe, which then propels him into everything else. Which is a fascinating story, like to hear of that roughing it. Or I think Sylvester Stallone, that's an interesting story. I think he sold his dog to get Rocky up and going, which is and he bought the dog back, but it was just like, wow, that's just completely nuts in order to be able to achieve that dream. So literally had nothing, was dirt poor, and then it sort of exploded. But as I pointed out to other people, you'll only hear about those stories. You won't hear about Joe, who did also sell his dog and then ended up on the streets and didn't make it, and his story wasn't that good because no one's ever going to write about that. I think it's somewhere, but it was interesting because there seemed to be a bit of a British dream in the fact that you could own a property, which then would give you something in retirement, and therefore you didn't have to worry about retirement. But we can now see that the retirement system looks horrendous. I mean, the stories that seem to be coming out about old people being abused within care, it's just unreal. Then you hear about the level wage, and you're going, right, well, that's horrendous. But just going on to that final point, the housing market, I think it's 4.2 times the value of an average wage in the 1980s was the ability to get onto the housing market. It's now 9.4 times your average wage to get onto the housing market. But boomers are telling us, in general, not all, but a large number are saying, oh, you just need to save. Or like Lee Anderson, who we keep bringing up on this program, just need to save. Switch on Netflix, and that £5 a month, that'll go.
Stop drinking coffee in a cafe.
Avocado toast. That's the thing, right? And with the cornerstone of neoliberal, not just economic policy, but the social policy that comes with it, right? Like I make no apologies for the fact, and I'm very open about being a Marxist myself. So one of the big things is based on superstructure, where you would say that the macroeconomic structure of the society would therefore affect or the base of the society, so it would affect then the cultural and social superstructure that we live under. And that's happened with neoliberalism. Thatcher admitted as much, right? The goal so the method is economics, but the goal is to change the soul. And we individualize problems, we atomize people. This is why there's a big drive amongst young people from people who are trying to appeal to them. With the kind of this hustle culture, I don't know if you've heard of this, where it's all about, well, if you're not working 70-hour weeks, if you're not don't have a side hustle, you don't making money on the side from some alternative means, then you deserve to fail. That's essentially what they're trying to say. Now, I don't disagree with the idea that people should be trying to make as much money as they can to make sure they have a comfortable life. But what we should be saying is this shouldn't be necessary. The line should be, we should be going back to the post-war consensus where, a single income was enough to raise a family on, rather than having this gigantic split between what we do have in this country is a lot of poor people and a lot of rich people. And that's how our economy now functions. There's no middle that you'd get from a social democratic economy, and housing is one of the big things about this, right? In that you mentioned retirement, and the biggest crisis that's going to come in the very near future is the crisis in social care. And none of the parties are talking about this, right?
Nope.
In 2017 and 2019, there was a plan for a national care service, which would have been the ideal solution to this problem. And now we're having the opposite's going to happen, where previously, if you're a homeowner, you'd pass your home down to your children.
Mm-hmm.
When all of this additional property wealth that the boomers and Gen Xers have gained over the course of the Thatcher, Blair, Cameron administrations, for example, they're going to have to sell that to pay for social care. And it's not going to be young people buying those houses. It's going to be BlackRock. It's going to be Vanguard. It's going to be TSB. And that's going to continue to push house prices up even further, whilst continually making sure a generation never gets on the housing ladder.
But also the question, there's a growing number of boomers who are renting. And what are they going to do? Like, they can't sell the home to go into social care. They don't own the home to sell it. So what's going to happen there? I think it's a ticking time bomb.
It really is. It really is. It needs sorting now. Unfortunately, we just continually have this short-termism from the entirety of our the political structure in this country, where it's always about this particular individual problem that's happening right now, and we have a solution that lasts for the next 5 or 10 years, depending on how long you reckon you're going to be in government, and then you put it on the later base for some other government to deal with once you're out of power. And it's, again, that's something that's going to happen under a representative democracy. But the fact that no one even thinks about these things no one talks about these things either. Like, how many times have you heard discussion about the social care crisis, not just on mainstream news, but even on channels like ours? Like, I've talked about it a couple of times, but I should be mentioning this more because it's a big problem.
I always find it interesting looking at football and going, could you imagine a system where the manager is basically restricting your wages so you can't eat properly, but demanding that you run the same amount as a Premier League footballer? I mean, it's batshit. I'll say
it's crazy, isn't it?
It's just, it's like, but there's no base. I mean, I was looking at the Roundtree report. It was over 100 years ago. And it's shocking how many similarities there are to back then, when he had to bring out a report saying we need more social housing, we need to get people out of the poverty line. 30% of the population are below the poverty line. They're starving, they're hungry, kids aren't reaching their full potential. And I mean, you have this like real interesting contrast in government policy, because one, they're saying we want us to be an intellectual superpower. Right, well, how do you increase IQ? There's a few ways. I keep saying this every week. You shrink the classes to no more than 19 kids a class. Well, no one's talking about that. Labour say they want 30. You want them learning an extra language. You want them doing sports on a regular basis, at least 3 to 5 times a week. Going out in nature, playing chess, golf. Like, they're not going to institute any of these things to be able to increase
but
IQ.
also even basic things like nutrition. The Tories have taken away free school meals once again. It required Marcus Rashford, a footballer, to put pressure on the Tory government to bring back free school meals for a limited amount of time. They're not interested in the next generation. As Helena said, they're only focused on this window of time. Okay, what can we achieve in this moment, and then to hell with the future.
There's a reason why, because they don't want to run the country. They don't care about running the country. They care about winning the next election, and then they will subcontract out the role of running the country to all these management consultants.
So I might argue with that. I'm going to play a bit of a devil's advocate. I say that they do, and they're trying to do as many little things as possible to ensure that kids have a neoliberal view. And I would say stop us ever going back into the EU, as many things as they possibly can. But I'd also argue there's an element of trying to make sure Labour don't look too good out of any of the policies that they put forward, because they know they're out. I mean, the stats are showing it could be down to anywhere between 10 and 70 MPs at the moment. I don't see them being able to solve that, because they'll have more scandals. They can't fix the economy short term. They haven't fixed it long term. Those are 3 key indicators. The NHS is a massive thing that everyone's concerned about. And I'm pretty sure social care is going to become one of those big issues as well. Just depends on how you spin it. I don't see how they're going to change that. And like, this segues in quite nicely with the CPTPP. Nailed it. So there's something very neoliberal about what they're doing with the CPTPP at the moment. I'm going to call it TP or Trans-Pacific. I'm not good, because as I was saying, before we came on, it's the equivalent of the amount we export and make money off toilet paper. So TP seems pretty appropriate, to be honest. So the way that's set up and organized is, and I've been a little bit mean about it, but I would say 12 unelected bureaucrats make a vote. Now, I'm having debates with people about how they vote and what they vote for. But essentially, it's called provisions. They vote for provisions. And it's 12 people. And I've had some people say, no, everyone has to have consensus. I've seen within document, you can have 2/3, which is really interesting. So you need 2/3 majority to be able to make a provision change within the trade agreement. But that's essentially, a provision might as well be a law, unless anyone wants to be able to argue that. And the thing that I found, which is the most interesting clause, is that it says all governments, I'm paraphrasing, all governments are basically able to retain all their laws. And then it goes, but provided that those laws don't contravene the trade agreement.
There is nothing in this chapter that prevents a member country from regulating the environment, health, or other objectives of this nature. But such regulation must be compatible with the other restrictions of the treaty.
But surely Britain has a veto, right? Like when they had, in the European Union. Obviously, the Brexiteers wouldn't be supporting this if, and I presume there'll also be a referendum to join TP, right?
You would think, wouldn't you? Isn't that what Brexiteers want? No.
Like, they kept saying we need to take back our sovereignty. Okay, well, this is surrendering sovereignty. It's one of the reasons, perhaps, that you had both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump against it back in 2016. It's bad for Britain. Like when you talk about the cost or the value of it, how much does it bring in? It brings in about a quarter of the amount of money that Rishi Sunak wrote off as fraud relating to the furlough scheme. A quarter of that is 1.5 billion over something like 10 years. He wrote off 4 billion in a year. So
we don't get it. We'll be able to make much more new frictionless trade with countries on literally the other side of the planet. Clearly, we're missing something here.
I could defend it a little bit. You're not going to like me defending it, but I could turn around and say insurance and services, online services, are now able to go into those markets to a certain extent. And obviously, speaking English, you've got a lot of those countries with the potential to have either English as their first language or a high degree of the people over there with English as a second language. So I could make a tiny case for that, but then you have to question how much. I'd like to look at both sides of an argument. I don't necessarily, I come to my own conclusion with it. It's good to look at both sides and go, look, is there anything there? But the rest of it is pointless. What, 50 days to get all the way over to, I think, Vietnam for traded goods? So how's that going to help anything? Then you've got the environmental impact, the climate change impact, which no one's talked about. And as you said, Max, there's no veto. Then they have the word progressive. If I use that word in the States, that's left wing. That's a left wing word.
The gigantic irony is that the CPTPP basically only exists because they were trying to create a large enough trade bloc to be able to force China to join so they can then impose restrictions on their use of state-owned enterprises. And the restrictions on state-owned enterprises is basically my biggest gripe with CPTPP as well, because obviously I'm a Marxist, I like state-owned enterprises. That's basically the thing I disliked the most about competition law when we're in the European Union, right? That we're now entering into the CPTPP whilst getting none of the benefits, none of the actual tangible benefits that we got from EU membership. And I think it's probably why they chose this agreement after all, is because they want to ensure that there is restrictions on the ability for any future Labour government to be able to use the use of the state to be able to undermine the supremacy of the market. Because again, that is if there's going to be one religion that kind of underlies a lot of not just conservative, but the Conservative Party's policy platform. Not all conservatives are free marketeers, but the Conservative Party definitely is. And that they operate on market principles as a religion without any regard to the externalities or regard to the utility of doing so.
We have mocked our economy, and now the economy has cast its vengeance upon us all. Yea, it is an angry and unforgiving economy. To repent, we must stop frivolous spending. Instead of paying for cable, let us watch clouds. Instead of buying clothes, wear but sheets from thine beds. cut spending to only the bare essentials. Water and bread and margaritas, yay.
But the true religion is the lamp. That is the true religion. All hail the lamp.
We do hail the lamp, it is true.
Yes, we converted another one, Max. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it links in very nicely with not very nicely, it does link in with the ISDS, which is why the EU never had a trade deal with the States. And which is why I believe that the States never signed up to Donald Trump pulled out of the TP agreement, because essentially it allows corporations to sue governments on their policy. And again, no one's talked about this. So it's been quite difficult finding all this information out, which is also ridiculous. We should have a complete file available to us in the UK explaining exactly what this is. But again, no transparency from our government. You actually had to go to the Australian and Canadian governments to be able to find out all this information about how it operates. But essentially the ISDS is allowing corporations to sue governments in case their policies cause a loss of profits. And that court case can be taken into the World Bank or the UN, or there could be arbitration between the countries internally. So I think you get one advocate from your country, one advocate from their country, or they pick someone, and then there's a person in the middle. But it also appears that the judges and the lawyers can rotate. So for a short period of time, the judges in the TP courts can also turn into advocates for a short period of time and then back to judges. And I'm like, this sounds really corrupt. Like you're just going to get people embedding themselves within certain structures and corporations.
This is coming from the right wing in this country who wanted to engage in this stuff. The people who talk about the enemy of the globalist enemy, the enemies of the big advocates for the end of globalization, and allowing these multinational corporations a complete supremacy over the actions of our own governments, not only surrendering sovereignty, as Max was pointing out earlier, but we're also embedding global neoliberal economics into the entire paradigm of how our government can operate, right? Not just in how it should operate, but by restricting the future operations of the government. It's ridiculous.
I love how you pointed out there's no veto. Even I hadn't twigged that. There was a veto, and you had a parliamentary system, so the population had representation within the EU.
Exactly.
And I watched GB News taking on John Falch from the Rejoin EU party, and she kept the presenter who was from the IEA was calling the EU a dictatorship, and I'm like, well, how's this any better?
Was that Emily Carver from GB News?
Ginger.
Yeah, Emily Carver. Yeah, she's an absolute fucking menace. To me, I said on Twitter, I was just like, when I am the General Secretary of the Central Committee of the the Communist Republic of England and Wales, right? First thing on the list, every single of those goons from all of the think tanks that keep ruining the country without any diplomatic oversight, straight to Gulag. Do not pass go. Do not collect £200. They're the enemy. They are. Obviously, that's a joke, what I'm saying about random stuff like that. But they are genuinely the enemy of the people of this country because they are propagandists for the richest people, not just in the country, but in the world. And the policies that they want to institute would cause gigantic amounts of social murder in this country. And they're paid very handsomely to do so, right? Like, people, I mean, you've actually had, I think you've had her on the show. Remember him, her, right?
Yeah, we're not in that kind of chamber.
Yeah, it's true. But she's very popular on TikTok, and she'll make these funny videos where she'll bring up her friends from the Conservative Party groups that she's in, or the Hayek Society, or whatever, and they'll go very viral just through to people mocking her on this platform. That's what she wants. She wants you to mock her. She doesn't care about whether or not you think that her politics are bad or not, because all that matters to these people is outreach. They want the outreach because then they can use that as an ability to be able to find these levers to get more and more people into public consciousness, so that she's now talking about getting rid of the NHS and LBC, for example, which is literally what she wants. These people, people from these think tanks, they want the end of the NHS.
I mean, the irony is that they talk about these economic policies, but historically it doesn't show that they work ever at all. I mean, there was a study into trickle-down economics. They
work very well. They work very well for the people who donate to the think tanks, right? And that's all.
But not long term. It doesn't work long term. It fails long term because you have an accumulation of wealth. And all that ends up happening is a load of people at the bottom don't have anything. And eventually they get so hacked off, they tend to have a revolution, especially if the education system is a little bit beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic.
The only disagreement I have there is if you look at the United States, like you know, it's heading, and I'm afraid the UK is heading in the direction of the United States, especially when it comes to healthcare. Like, you know, you had Wes Streeting, and I know Helena will agree with me on this. You have Wes Streeting, who's like, well, we need to bring in private companies, you know, to fix these problems. And I've said, you know, the private companies are not going to go, okay, yeah, done, problem solved, we'll go away now, you can go back to a public health service. No, they're going to remain embedded, and it's going to get worse. And if you look at what's happening in the United States, if you don't have health insurance, you're fucked. You're left dying on the street, literally dying on the street. And, you know, we look at that and go, that's terrible, that would never happen here. But it, you know, today you say it wouldn't happen. Tomorrow it's like, well, maybe, you know, a few calls by people from the IEA into LBC or a few, you know, on Politics Live.
It's live, yeah.
Yeah, telling people like, you know, but why should you know, you're doing well for yourself. You have a good job. Why should you pay for somebody who's lazy or somebody who doesn't give a crap? You know, you're paying into a healthcare system. You're healthy. You don't need it. You don't need to be paying taxes to fund somebody who's, you know, smoking 50 cigarettes a day or eating junk food. You know, this is the sort of arguments they use to try and convince the public that, you know, we shouldn't be paying for people's bad habits, people's bad choices, personal choices. So we should have a different system. We should have a system where, you know, people who are lazy or people who make bad choices, you know, have to deal with those the consequences of that. And I'm really afraid that you have organizations like the IEA or these think tanks who are pushing these American-style solutions. Like as you said earlier about the hustle culture, like this is really I think something imported from America. You know, you're not making enough money in your job, drive for Uber or you know, do Deliveroo or something like that, in order to achieve success. Instead of actually having a proper social safety net where, you know, if you do lose your job or if you have problems, that there is a state support there.
The ability to be able to have a job that pays for everything, right? We've had what was the study from the Resolution Foundation that came out saying that if wages had risen as they should have done with the overall rise in economic growth over this period, we'd be on average £11,000 per worker better off. But we're not like that because union density is low, the workforce is being casualised, and the Conservative government in the wake of Brexit are deliberately trying to strip away what little workers' rights we have left in this country.
Pretty much. I mean, that's part of what the toilet paper agreement is all about. I mean, essentially, there's stuff in there just, and I need to dig around and see what the actual effects are, because I don't think we signed into the toilet paper agreement until July, but there are provisions in there to put restrictions on government purchasing. So you then go, right, well, what's the NHS going to do if they purchase in bulk? We should be able to save money. So the statistics that I've read and looked at so far suggest that we would triple our costs for, let's say, cancer medicine. So cancer medicine costs us 200 million a month. If we were under the same scheme that they have, and this is also interesting, the toilet paper agreement is also very similar to it follows a lot of US law, because they were the ones that sort of initiated a lot of this. I know they weren't the founders, but they initiated it, and a lot of the founding countries wanted the US in. And so they wanted some sort of similar US-based law, which is why, and it's interesting with the ISDS as well. And it also comes back to the ideology as well that we were saying earlier. The ISDS is putting power in the position of business, not democracy, which I find fascinating, which would then be a neoliberal idea. But we spend 200 million on cancer treatment a month. If we go under this and possibly under this CPTPP agreement, we could then triple our costs because we're not allowed to buy in bulk. So that reduces the purchasing power of the NHS, which is one of the reasons why it's actually quite effective. On an individual level, someone's got to pay for this treatment. One way or the other, someone is going to have to pay for the treatment. So is it the individual who could have a random illness turn up or be randomly hit by a car, or is it the state and we buy in bulk and it's cheaper? And the way I always look at it is like, if you want an effective, cheap way of keeping the population healthy, this is a way of doing it. Doing it the individual way doesn't really help anyone. But you'll have advocates on TV. I'm sure I've seen a doctor recently come out and go, yeah, they should all be paying for it individually, or I've heard a doctor go, so we don't have enough medical healthcare provision, and we can bring in HRT with this. So we should just limit it to the rich. And if you think I'm mad about that, hormone replacement therapy, in the document released by government, the reason why they're not giving it out for free is because production values of HRT are so low, they can't give it out. So their solution is to give it only to those that can afford it in order to reduce supply demands. And economically, you're going, you've got a short workforce. Maybe helping all these women that are going through severe menopause get out of that to an extent, doesn't help everyone, but help might increase your workforce. But they don't think like that. They like, on an economic level, they're morons. On an ethical level, they're like little devils. And I'm going, your policies don't make any sense. Even, and I'll finish on this, Otto von Bismarck, a staunch right-wing monarchist, could see the benefits of a welfare system over almost 150 years ago. And it did improve Germany. How the fuck do you not understand these basic levels of economics? Like, it's just unreal that they're this stupid. I think, sorry, I will end on this. Rees-Mogg came out the other day trying to get us to have more kids. And you're like, we can't afford it. And it goes back to that football analogy. I'm the manager. I'm going to give you enough wages so you can just eat, not to have the real healthy stuff, but I expect you to run at a Premier League pace. It's totally stupid. Go on, Helena.
This is why I always say that I think that the worst prime minister of all time in this country is David Cameron. And like, I think that the big difference between Cameron and Thatcher is that Thatcher saw a problem and tried to solve it, right? I don't agree with the solutions. I think she was a terrible prime minister, but at least by changing the economic structure of the country, she saw a problem that she wanted to fix. She saw issues and she tried to fix them. That's not what you get from conservatives nowadays. They follow neoliberalism as a religion. It's a religion that they follow. They ignore the externalities. They ignore any of the problems associated with it. They don't understand the economics behind any of it either. I mean, at least Thatcher knew never to privatize the railways. Yeah, that was a major policy. And they don't care. They don't care about any of the things that are happening. They watch the country crumble around them and they go, the problem is we're not doing it hard enough. If we do it even harder, maybe the country will just come back from somewhere. And that's what Liz Truss was doing, essentially. She thought we more neoliberalism, even more of it. And so that maybe that'll solve things. It hasn't solved anything. Which is what kind of blackpilled me about this country, really, is that after 5 years of the coalition government screwing things up through following this policy with no rhyme or reason for doing so, after all of that, the country went, yep, 5 more years of that, they gave David Cameron a majority. Because fundamentally, the ideological precepts that come from this, the individualization, the atomization, led to these people up huge swathes of the country were like, well, I've got a mortgage, I've got a decent job that I got during the Blair administration, right? I don't care that millions of people are being immiserated in this country by the harshest austerity policies in a generation. But I've got mine now, so I don't have to care. And that was the ideological brainwashing of the neoliberal macroeconomic paradigm writ large.
I'm all right, Jack.
Exactly. And one thing I want to point out about your discussion around, just one very small thing, a discussion around paying for drugs on the NHS, because of the cartelization of the pharmaceutical industry that supply us, for example, with generics, the price of generic drugs has increased by 80%, 100% in some cases. We pay double. Even inflation adjusted for generic medicines would have been terrible, right? If we, had a state-owned pharmaceutical manufacturing company that was being proposed by the Labour Party in 2017, 2019, to be able to make drugs at cost for the NHS. But we don't do that anymore. Instead of paying double what we would pay from the cartelization of the pharmaceutical industry, whilst from our closest suppliers in places like Denmark, for example, we now are going to be paying triple because of the competition regulation from the CPTPP. It's grim. It's really grim.
It's going towards that Americanization, as you said, which then is a nice segue into those attack ads we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
I was shocked to see that. I didn't think it was real. I didn't think that was from the Labour Party. Max, what are your thoughts on this attack ad that's come out?
So I remember back in 2016, Hillary Clinton said, when they go low, we go high. That didn't seem to work. I don't know if it didn't work because of that, but I think what we're going to see is we're going to see very, very toxic stuff over the next number of months and years. It's going to get the attack ad. So if for people who haven't seen it, you probably find it online, but it's a picture of Rishi Sunak, and then there's talk about child abuse and stuff like this, and the numbers. Now, to be honest, Rishi Sunak wasn't prime minister back in 2010, and the data is from 2010. But it's the style of the attack ad is pretty grim. But I think it's going to get much worse than that. This is mild compared to what we're going to see from the Tory side and from the Labour Party. But we expected the Labour Party to say, no, we will take the moral high ground. We will not do these sort of things. But I think all bets are off now, and as I said before, it's about chasing these marginal seats. Maybe they've done polling. I don't know. I'm just speculating, but maybe they've done polling, and these sort of attack ads are actually quite popular in these areas. With these focus groups, you would expect your side to take the moral high ground, but maybe that's no longer the case.
I mean, it's absolutely revolting, given that we are now back into been mainstreamed by the Conservative Party. This idea of the Pakistani men grooming our children, for example, has been frozen back into the public consciousness by Suella Braverman on a very publicly doing so. For the Labour Party to then take a South Asian man, I know he's Indian, he's Hindu, right? I understand that, but are racists going to know the difference? It's very obvious they don't know the difference between these things. To then put a South Asian man next to these pretty grim accusations, but they specifically said Rishi Sunak doesn't want to imprison people who engage in CSA, for example. And then they put Rishi Sunak's signature on the poster. It's so grotesque, and it's only making things worse, right? Like I don't know if obviously people leftoids on Twitter get roasted a lot of the time by people calling us Tory enablers because we criticize the Labour Party so much. And I'm like, this is by engaging in these adverts, this is Tory enabling. You may not be enabling the party, but you're certainly enabling the ideology, right? Yep. By taking the narrative that's being spun by the Conservative Party headquarters, by their spin doctors, for example, and then running with that, and then agreeing with the narrative, but just saying, well, actually, the Conservatives are worse than we are. Labour are better. That does nothing to change the ideological direction of this country, and only freezes conservatism into the public consciousness, whilst also just being, in general, just morally reprehensible, right? Although the John McDonnell came out saying, this is not what the Labour Party should be. And I'm like, tough shit, mate. This is what the Labour Party is now. Get used to it.
Would you see the comparison with maybe earlier on in the last number of years where in the earlier part of the previous Tory Lib Dem administration, where it was at the beginning of the austerity years, when the Labour Party were sort of pretty pro-austerity as well. They were talking about Benefit Street, and they were talking about how, we need to crack down on, benefit fraud and stuff like this. Do you see it something similar to that?
100%. There's no contrary narrative, right? Once you accept their framing of an issue wholesale, you shift the Overton window rightwards. Say your criticisms, you can make criticisms of Jeremy Corbyn. I'm not some kind of cultist or some kind of sycophant. But for example, you look at what happened in 2017 when an alternative narrative was given. People, Labour got their highest vote in a general election since 2001, essentially. It was more than in 2005 and 2017. And you look at the kind of, I know they never came to fruition, obviously, because they never were, but think about the lines that Boris Johnson was going with in 2019. For example, they were talking about building more houses, building more hospitals, levelling up the country. None of these things obviously happened. They were never going to happen. But they were forced, right? They were forced by the shifting of the Overton window leftwards to pander to interventionist economic policy in a way that the Conservatives haven't done in decades. For example, like Boris Johnson was, ironically, despite being the worst person to be prime minister, basically of all time, I don't think anyone comes really close to the person who was unfit to be in the role. But as a political platform, it's probably the most left-wing the Tories have looked since Ted Heath, possibly even, because there was a clamouring amongst people in this country for state intervention. They wanted money in their communities. They wanted more money in the NHS. And Boris Johnson was going to lie about it because he lies about everything. But he was happy to pander to to at least look like that was something that people wanted, which we are now people looking at. And people do want this stuff. Like, the majority of Conservative voters want the water companies under public control. They want these things nationalised, and we're getting it from neither party. And if both parties continue ignoring these blanket publicly supported policies, we're going to get political unrest.
It's interesting that hasn't happened yet. I find, like, historically, again, something should have kicked off. Mm-hmm. And what it'll probably come down, it'll be a specific event. Something will just set it off. Basically, it's the kindling and the wood. It just needs a spark. That's just a historical perspective. I'm not advocating that in any way, shape, or form. But people are really, really pissed off. And I mean, just go watch Question Time. You'll hear from the right-wing commentators, oh, it's leftists. They haven't really picked anyone. The show's going, no, we pick in order of the voting for that area. So the majority of the crowds that turn up are conservative. You'll hear the left wing go, no, it's right wing. So you're sort of like, okay, even if it wasn't that well blended, there should be like 40 or 50% of the population should be conservative inside that Question Time audience. And you can see those conservative voters are very, very angry with the system.
And they don't support conservative policy. They don't support the conservative economic policy at all. I mean, like for example, my point got away from me here, but just in general, I mean, that's what I was going to say. Liz Truss basically nixed trickle-down economics forever. People don't want it. People don't like it, which is why we're talking about cultural issues all of a sudden, because conservatives know they can't win on economic policy anymore.
Yeah, it's done deal, isn't it? I'm sorry to say, I can't remember. There is a guy who is doing massive Trump attack ads, and he's literally goading Trump into taking him to court. If Trump wants to have these taken down, he's like, take me to court.
And to just give Donald Trump a message, since you threatened to sue the Lincoln Project this morning, go for it. Go for it, bitch. Come at me. I can't wait. We're delighted by the thought that you would try to sue us, Donald. Do it. Do it. I double dog dare you. You know, when we put up the billboards in Times Square of Jared and Ivanka during the COVID crisis at the end of the 2020 campaign, we received this letter from Mark Kasowitz, Donald Trump's attorney, and it was this complete, blustering shit show. Oh, we will certainly sue you. We read it in the Bain voice, right? You're not going to sue anybody, Donald. You're not going to do shit. You're not going to do a goddamn thing. You are weak. You are impotent. You are flabby. You are sitting there in the bridal suite at Mar-a-Lago or in the bridal suite at Bedminster, grinding your gears, wondering why that the Lincoln Project, no matter how many times you tried to kill us, keeps coming at you. You know why? We're here in this fight for the long haul because you are a threat to democracy. You are a threat to America. You are a threat to the Republic. You are a threat to the Constitution. You are a thief of classified documents. You are a traitor to this country. You've tried to overthrow this government and the system of our peaceful transition of power, and fuck you. We're here. You're not. We will keep kicking your ass every single day. So if you want to try to sue us, Donald, go for it. Throw down. Let's go. We can't wait. You won't do it because you are, in fact, as I said previously, completely impotent. Just ask Melania. Anyway, folks, other than that, it's a great day for America. Steve Bannon is looking at the inside of a jail cell once again. Donald Trump is raging in Mar, go fuck yourself, or Bedminster, wherever he is today. And it's a good day to be in the fight. Talk to you soon.
Deal, isn't it? I'm sorry to say, we're out. We've just hit our market. I know, it's always sad, isn't it? So, just like to say thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for coming on today. It would be great to have you back again sometime soon.
Absolutely, it's been an absolute blast. I had a lot of fun. People are watching. Follow me. The @ is down there. Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you want to follow me.